Good
Hey guys.
afternoon, Tim. How are you doing?
Hello. Hi, Ricky. Hi, Joseph. I'm fine. How are you guys doing today?
Doing very well, thank you.
Good.
Just briefly before we start, I thought it'd be important for us to share our experiences of how the coronavirus pandemic has affected us all. What's your role as a journalist, and how's the pandemic affected your role? And do you think any of the changes from the pandemic will last?
Um, in the most immediate terms, the pandemic has meant that we're no longer working in our office. And I've been a journalist for around 30 years. I'm not working in an office with a team of other journalists is a really big change. Oddly, I live very near what was our office. So it's kind of in my sight line literally every day. We Zoom with each other. We have two big editorial meetings, one at 10 o'clock in the morning and one at 4:30 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, where we discuss the entire story list for that day and then for the coming day as well, and the progress of all those stories with the writers, both on staff and freelance that I edit. Um, and that's really the shape of our day. I think it's probably very similar to a lot of newsrooms and to a lot of journalists at the moment. It affects not as well as the working process. It affects not being able to interview people face to face or go out and report stories, literally go out and report stories, which I love to do, in person. Um, I mean, everything really for really pretty much all the reporting, apart from when there were demonstrations and things on the streets, has been done by Zoom and by phone. So I think probably like everybody, like a lot of other people, not just in journalism, but in other industries and in other circumstances, that's the shape of my working life at the moment. How about you guys?
Definitely. Zoom has really become something that's central to online learning for us in the UK and across the world, definitely. Joseph, pass on to you now.
Yeah, the coronavirus made a big change in terms of being able to communicate with each other and not in just the creation of ideas, but the polishing of ideas as well. We found that because we can't see people face to face, even in school, we're in separate bubbles depending on where you are in the school. So yeah, it's been a
Yeah.
real big change for us as well. But as we know, one of the key parts of journalism is interviews and having interview pieces. And just to kickstart us off, we'd like to ask you what makes a great interview and what exactly do you look for when you're creating one?
Sure. For me personally, I mean, I love interviewing. I won't, it'll be a bit big-headed if I do, but I've got a bunch of awards for my interviews and my work generally just above my head here, which I work beneath, trying to live up to them day in, day out. In terms of interviewing, whether it's a celebrity or a news subject, somebody who's not a celebrity, some principles I think remain constant for me, and I don't know if they will echo for you as well or even be helpful, but I'll tell you what they are. The first thing I think about is something that I learned very early on from news editors that I used to work with and when I did work experience and things like that, which was the idea of a story should always, the first thing to do is to move a story forward. So whatever story you're going out to work on, and that can be an interview or it can just not be an interview, but whatever you're working on, you're looking to move the existing story forward or to break new news, to get new information. So one of the key things I think about when I go and interview somebody, whether that's Mariah Carey or somebody driving a bus down the street, is what hasn't that person said before? And what could be the news story here? And if it's somebody very well known, can I break something or can I find out information that's going to be so big that it will create news in itself? Um, all of this should be done respectfully. You shouldn't be out to trap anybody. You should have another very important thing, a genuine interest in the person that you're talking to, whether they are famous or not. Personally, and different journalists do this different ways, but personally, I do not have a list of questions in front of me. I don't have pieces of paper in front of me. I've tried, for want of a better term, to do my homework before I've gone to the interviewee, whoever they are, and I want to have a conversation with them. I know generally what they've said before, if they've said anything before, or what I want to find out. I keep things in my bag, but I very rarely look in the bag at the piece of paper. I'm very much focused on that person. Eye contact, extremely important when you're sitting with somebody and talking to them. Not looking down at notes or like not doing anything that's going to take away from the intimacy and the immediacy of being with them. If you think, always think about your family and your friends and your loved ones. And if you're sitting with them at a table, having a conversation, or sitting with them anywhere and exchanging information of whatever kind, whether it's personal or a conversation about politics or whatever it's about, think about how much more useful and constructive those conversations are if you maintain eye contact and be generally present in that room with that person. Other things, I've read quite a lot. If the people I'm interviewing are well known, I know about their lives. I've done my research before I've gone in. I am not the kind of person to leave difficult questions or hard questions to the end of an interview. Some people do definitely do that because there is a concern that if you ask somebody something incredibly personal or incredibly difficult, there's some people who think that could derail a conversation depending on the response of your interviewee. I just don't do that because not only am I an optimist and hope that the conversation will continue, but I honestly do think, and my experience in all the time of doing this, I found this to be the case, is that if you ask these sorts of difficult questions, whether it's about marriage, abortions, adoptions, death, childhood, if you ask any of these questions respectfully enough and in the right way, in the right manner, i.e. in a spirit of genuine inquiry, they will respond. People will respond to it. They may tell you to bugger off and they may say no comment and they may seem offended, but always be ready to hold your ground. You're there to do a job. You're not there to be a friend, which is a trap some journalists can fall into. You are there to do a job and to get information and to do so as respectfully and as thoroughly as possible. This is your time. So never ever be scared. Another bit of advice. I'm weaving in the advice to my answer, which I hope you're getting. Never ever be scared of asking anything. This is your time. The worst feeling that you can have when you leave an interview is, I didn't ask that thing. And whether that was inhibition or fear or something else, self-consciousness, it's a horrible feeling to get on the bus or the train and go home with, I can tell you. And even worse, and this should make you smile, is the response of your editor when you come to write the piece and they say, hang on, you didn't ask about the divorce with J-Lo or something? And you're like, well, I just ran out of time. That's not good enough. Like, go there. This is your time. And honestly, you can end up with some amazing exclusives and scoops. And beyond that, you can end up with an amazing exchange and an amazing conversation and something to be proud of. These sorts of interviews that you do, and I'm thinking about a whole range of interviews I've done in my career, like good interviews stand the test of time, even if the person's life story moves forward from the time, I mean, everybody's will, that's what time does. But they will stand the test of time. And doing a really wonderful portrait of a celebrity, or talking, as I did a long time ago, to people who'd either survived 9/11 or who'd lost loved ones at 9/11, and sitting down with those sorts of people and discussing those sorts of things, they can be very powerful experiences, and they're ones that you will remember in your careers too. So have no fear, have questions ready in your mind, be ready for an interview to go off the rails if somebody takes offense, or if somebody says, how dare you ask me that? You can say, well, I have asked you that. Is that a no comment? We can move on if you like, but I must ask the question. That's my job. Never, ever apologize for asking questions. When you're interviewing them, famous or not, people will often either act offended or seem like, why should I answer that? Well, it's up to them if they answer it, but it's up to you to always make sure that you ask it. That is your job.
Thank you. I think the point that you mentioned about the apology was really resonant with recent events, especially with political reporters who interview politicians. And I was thinking, how do you, or should you even try to develop any sort of rapport? Because as you mentioned, you shouldn't develop a relationship, but how do you get them to talk about issues that they're perhaps more reluctant to talk about?
That's a really wonderful question. I mean, there's a difference between rapport and friendship. And there's a difference between, I mean, even if I was friends with somebody, there's a difference. Sometimes I've sat opposite a friend and interviewed them, but we know that the interview is separate to our friendship. I mean, that takes being adults. And I would, if you're talking about political news reporting generally, you can see that the political news reporters on our televisions, whether we're in Britain or here in America, you can see that day in, day out, they're dealing with these people. So clearly, quite naturally, there are a set of professional relationships and brackets, sometimes friendships happening off camera or off the page, as it were, away from it. Now, hopefully, what happens in these worlds is that stories bubble up and stories happen, and you just have to kind of go with it. And you hope that the other person is adult enough to realize this is your job, and you must be adult enough to realize they're doing their job. And what comes out of the meat machine at the end is the story. I mean, if you're asking, can friendships be imperiled by these sorts of things? I suppose so. I suppose there can be big enough stories that have big effects on people's lives or reputations, whereby maybe a friendship will go by the wayside. But my experience of political news reporting is that politics is such a constant 24/7 machine and media process, is that it doesn't make sense for either side to completely obliterate or get rid of or destroy friendships and relationships over a story that may not have gone the way that either side would have wanted. Because believe me, the next day, another set of stories will come along. And so, do you know what I mean? It makes no practical sense sometimes for either side to press the nuclear button.
You said earlier about saying that at some point some interviewees may say, "Oh, no comment," or along those lines. What strategies are you using to try and avoid having a scenario like that occurring and trying to keep the conversation going?
Oh, I've done everything. I mean, I will move on to a different way to ask the question. I will say, well, you may not want to comment on that, but something I'm really interested in is your view on this. So I never if somebody tries to bring an end to something, as a journalist, I sort of think it's my responsibility to keep the conversation going. And so there's always something else in the bank. Like there's always something else back there. It depends what context you're in. If you've got 5 minutes and you're on deadline, I would say, well, tell me, if you're not going to comment on that, then tell me about your position on X. So just go on to some other, just try and get something. If I've got a longer, when I've been sometimes with some of the celebrity or bigger sort of personality people I've met, and I have like a longer time, maybe an hour or an hour and a half. One thing I've always said to some of my colleagues at work is I sometimes go to childhood. I know that might sound funny, but talking, this is only if you have the time. Please don't do this if you have 5 minutes and you're on deadline with somebody. I don't think your editor would appreciate it. But if you have a bit of a longer time, sometimes going back to somebody's childhood and doing some research before you, as I say, research your subject before you go in. Know where they grew up. Know about what family structure they grew up in. Often foundational things that happen in my life, your life, our subjects' lives, make us slightly who we are, or at least influence a lot of character development. And so I often, to answer your question, go back to my subject's past, and sometimes right back to childhood to get a sense of who they were as kids. And often when you talk to somebody about growing up and formative experiences when they were growing up, they really appreciate it as well, because they can see that you're not just going for the scoop, for the kind of dish, for the big gossip item. If you say, I was super interested, at 8, you moved from Malaysia to London. What was that like? Sort of, how did that affect you? Or, oh, your grandfather invented the electric telephone. Or your mum died when you were 10. How did that affect family life? Do you know what I mean? If you sort of ask those sorts of things, it will enrich the conversation with the person beside you. They'll see that you're genuinely interested in a story of their lives, not just the hot ticket item that you may want to get to in the next 5 minutes. And to ask those bigger questions, I'm as direct as possible. Some of my colleagues are not, and you'll see some people on television slightly getting nervous when they have to ask those things, I see no point in being anything but direct, and just asking the difficult things very, very directly. And again, I find that people at least respond and respect that, because again, you're not trying to, I don't know, you're not trying to go in at the side. I take the temperature of a room, guys, to be honest. You know, I've walked into some rooms where I can see that the person really doesn't want to talk. And I've walked into rooms where they can't wait to open their mouth. And I've walked into rooms where people are crying, and I've walked into rooms where people are in grief states, and I've walked into rooms where people are angry. And I don't know, there are all kinds of emotional, when you walk into whatever this interview context is, take a read of the room and govern your first and opening questions accordingly, because you may need to either calm things down a bit, or conversely, to meet the energy that's coming at you.
Thank you. Linking to what you said about time and change of like digital media in this evolving age, how would you get the most out of an interview, especially as a journalist, if you have loads of time constraints, for example?
Well, you mean how do I get the most if I'm just got like 5 minutes with somebody or something like that?
Yes, or if the person you're interviewing has a tight deadline or
yeah, sure.
deadline.
Well, then I will I'll try and get 3 or 4 questions of what either the news of the day is, what they're in the news for, and kind of go for it. Basically, if you've really only got that amount of time, think about why they're opposite you, or why they're on the phone with you or on Zoom with you. Think about what the public, if they're in the public eye for a particular reason, you've just got to ask them about whatever that thing is. And sometimes it's, so just basically go for the jugular. That's what I'm saying, basically. And again, remember that overriding principle of moving that story forward. So if you're opposite somebody, you've got 5 minutes, but they've already said something that they're in the news for, or they're known for, think about, how am I going to move this story forward? What's the next set of headlines around this thing going to be? And can I generate that out of this conversation? So don't go over the old ground of what's been out there already. Forward, forward, forward. So think about that. And if you're lucky, as happened to me sometimes I've been told, Tim, you've got 5 minutes. And weirdly, in those 5 minutes, the conversation has gone off in such an interesting angle. Sometimes the person involved has said, actually, I'd like a bit more time, just leave us be, type of thing. So sometimes you've only got 5 minutes. If you're extremely lucky, and it can honestly just come down to the chemistry between you and your interviewee, if they're famous or not, it doesn't matter. That can sometimes mean you end up with more time.
What you said about having the confidence to ask the questions that you really want to know about, I feel like that's a big thing for young journalists, just growing and sort of just growing that confidence of being able to ask those questions. How did you, as an experienced journalist, how did you develop the confidence to interview in an effective manner like that?
I think I worked on news desks all through my life, and I was fortunate, whether the news desks were big or small, to work around people doing exactly the same thing day in, day out. And so, although this might sound strange, and I know that we're working remotely at the moment, but I hope you both have been able to work around in other times, pre-pandemic and hopefully post-pandemic, you're going to be working in an office with other journalists doing the same thing. Because I sometimes find, and again, I'm not sure about you guys, but I find great inspiration and sort of collective strength, stimulation, sometimes wisdom, by working around other people doing the same job. It might be on different stories, but it's really great hearing, oh, that's how Vicky asked that question. Oh, Andrew, okay, that's cool. And there's a tone, and there's a kind of, we're not similar people by any stretch, but just hearing people do the job can often be very inspiring. Personally, and very honestly, I've had lovely editors all through my career, but hard editors, like editors who really wanted to get the stories, you know? And I think knowing sort of wanting to make sure that I had a good enough story for the editor and for the publication was always a motivation as well. Like I was always very proud of where I was working, and I wanted to, I hope it doesn't sound too hokey, but I kind of wanted to meet the standards and the kind of expectation of a publication and the people working for that publication. And personally, I found the confidence because, going back slightly to what I said earlier, confidence doesn't sometimes come naturally. I mean, there's nothing natural when you think about it, going into a room and asking somebody about their marriage breakdown for half an hour and then leaving that room, right? So you have to make that as normal as possible. And you hope that your interviewee knows, I mean, there's the rules of engagement that you're going into, but this is not exactly the most natural situation. So it's kind of up to both of you to kind of make this weird situation sort of work. Now, for me, I just sort of, I feel a great responsibility just to ask the question that I know the reader may want me to ask. I always remember one of my editors saying, you know, you're in that room, but really there's a whole bunch of readers kind of there as well. So whoever I'm in the room with, whether they've survived a car crash or they've just won an Oscar, I'm kind of thinking, if you're reading this at the kitchen table or on your phone on the train or something, what do you want to know from X? Like, what's the question? And, you know, that's it. And I do not like, once or twice I've left rooms thinking I haven't asked what I really wanted to ask, either because of time or I just didn't quite sort of on that particular day to go there. But I remember it's a respect thing, and it's a respect for the interview that you're doing and a self-respect thing, right? Like it's like your job. And part of the key thing about being a journalist is getting information and moving stories forward. And I suppose what gives me the confidence is that's what I need to do here. And often with journalism, there are many forces ranged against that, either from public relations people or government handlers, or just people trying to stop you getting that information. And so part of where else my confidence comes from is I've got to meet the challenge here head on. And I want to walk away from this, even if I don't get the scoop of the century, I want to walk away from this knowing either in this 5 minutes or this hour and a half, I've sort of met the challenge of getting that information and moving that story forward. And I think not being big-headed about it is really important. Like, don't go in there and just don't be all puffed up and sort of arrogant about it. Like, meet and talk to people as you would respectfully want to be spoken to yourself, I think. If they've done something terrible, provably terrible, by all means be challenging and ask them about their terrible deeds. But I would just say, remember you're a conduit of information and not, you know, all conquering Hercules every single time.
Thank you. It's been a great talking to you. Thank you for sharing your valuable experiences with us. It's been lovely talking to you. Thank you.
My pleasure. How is it going for both you guys? Are you guys hoping to do this as a job in your futures, or what would you like to do, both of you?
Well, I'd like to become a musician. I play with several orchestras, but I'd like to keep up doing journalism on the side and attend a journalism societies and write for the student paper. So
that's great. And writing for the student paper is wonderful, Ricky. Like, definitely. How about you, Joseph?
I'm really into history, but I would like to continue with journalism as well. I really like sport journalism as well as political. So yeah, it's something I want to continue onwards with as I get older.
Well, I'm sure you guys will, and I'm sure you're already in touch with it. But when I was, let's see, I did begin doing work experience super early, and I'm sure you've got brilliant contacts, but ask your teachers if not, and try and get into either local journalism first or volunteer. I don't know if you're interested in print journalism or broadcast, but I sort of, when I did want to, I mean, I didn't have a clear idea, I think, too early about what I wanted to do. But when I did, I just kind of wrote off to radio stations or TV stations and newspapers and just sought to do some experience. And I think just being in those newsrooms sometimes, even if I wasn't doing anything that glamorous, hint, I was making a lot of coffee for people and photocopying at that time, but it was really valuable experience, actually. And as I did more and more work experience in more and more different places, it actually helped me figure out the kind of lane of journalism that I've ended up sort of in. I kind of did radio and a bit of TV and a local newspaper and then a national newspaper, and just doing all those different experiences, especially radio, which I have a love for, was extremely, extremely useful. Also because they all had really different styles in terms of news gathering. So whatever you guys are interested in, it's sometimes really wonderful to go into different environments of news and be like, oh, that's how you make a radio news package. And oh, that's how you do it. Okay, that's newspaper and then local paper. I don't know. Anyway, it was really wonderful being around very different kinds of journalists who do their job.
Sometimes even the subtleties as well and house style that you have from publication to publication, that's also really cool.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And you're right, like, and that's actually a really important lesson, Ricky. Like, house style was the thing that, it's so funny you should mention that, because it was the thing that, right at the beginning when I was doing things, it might sound stupid, but I kind of, because I used to read, let's see, The Guardian, I guess, when I was a teenager, and I sort of thought everything was like, I knew that there were different, obviously that the Sun was different to The Guardian, but I guess when I went to different places, I still thought there was this just aim to write like that sort of thing. And to actually go into different places, like you say, and see the very different ways to write and craft something will be a big string to your bows, because in your jobs, whatever your futures bring you, and I hope they bring you immense fulfillment, quite seriously, it's because it's a wonderful job, even to be involved with full or part-time. It will give you fulfillment, I promise. Maybe not so much money at the beginning, but it does give you something. Was the house style thing, and actually mastering house style and being able to do a piece or an article for X and then doing a different article for a very different publication was really great. It was like, oh, I can write in different voices, or I can speak in different voices. And it's a very empowering skill to master if you can do it.
Yeah, that is, I think that's a really important difference as well between different groups. So yeah, that's really really important. Thank you for your time. It's been great talking to you. Thank you for having a talk to us today.
My pleasure. I hope it was useful. And if there's anything that you haven't asked me, or anything that you want any clarification with, ask Richard, and he can pass on emails or anything like that. But if there's anything that isn't clear, or anything that you think later on, oh, I really wanted to know about that, always just feel free to ask. But most of all, good luck in whatever you both do. And just, journalism can sometimes be hard. And I know how some people can see journalists, and I know the rap it can get sometimes, but I promise you that that the job itself can be immensely fulfilling and something to be enjoyed and be extremely proud of as well.
Thank you.
Okay.